Throughout history, influential women have paved the way for women around the world to be treated equally as
a student in the classroom,
a valued voter in elections,
a hardworking employee within the workforce,
a member of the armed forces,
an educator to the youth of America,
a legislator for our nation,
and lastly, a competitive athlete.
However, the journey to get these advancements was not easy, especially the fight for athletic rights. Women never had the privilege to certain rights, and many people were against allowing them competitive freedom. This led to the making of the Title IX program.
The creation of the Title IX program in 1972 started a global revolution of advancements in women's athletic rights.
A common belief in the 1800s was that physical activity for women was thought to be hazardous to their health because during their menstrual cycle they were thought to be temporarily weakened.
Before 1870, women were involved with recreational activities rather than organized sporting events.
Recreational horseback riding, showboating, and swimming became fashionable for women, but they were not encouraged to exert themselves, again, in fear of damage to their health.
As more women showed interest and became more involved in physical activity, they became more competitive. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, women began to form informal athletic clubs.
Tennis, croquet, bowling, and archery were popular in clubs across the United States. Select men's clubs allowed women to become associates and to participate in separate activities, but not equally or with as many rights as them.
Similar clubs and colleges began to form during this time. However, they have hardly been recognized by historians because competition was between students within their college instead of competing against other colleges.
Competitions usually were intramural, club, and sorority matches. In 1936, 70% of colleges that were surveyed used this as their main form of sports participation for women.
Women's physical educators were aware of the problems and shortage of rights women were receiving in comparison to men when it came to athletics. They were determined to get women competitive athletic rights.
In the early 1900s, the Committee on Women's Athletics and the American Physical Education Association sponsored programs of general participation for women. In 1929, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching produced its report called American College Athletics, which argued that there should be a way to give athletics back to the boys.
While frustrating to female physical educators, they remained determined to fight for and organize competition for women's sports.
The start of the 1920s was marked the formation of the Women's Division National Amateur Athletic Federation, whose goal is to organize intercollegiate competition for women.
The women's suffrage movement in the late 19th and 20th century led to the creation of the 19th Amendment in 1920.
The right to vote for women put a strong emphasis on women's freedoms. The first feminist movement brought significant gains for women in sports and intercollegiate competition.
However, these improvements were largely related to the Depression in the 1930s. They remained a low priority for almost 50 years. The Depression deprived millions of Americans of work, which gave great support to a campaign fighting to keep women home and out of the workforce.
This brought the women's movement for expanding equal rights to a halt. The image and expectation society had of women was that they belonged in the home, which pushed the idea that there were benefits to be gained for women's involvement in sports to the side.
This sexist view remained the same until the beginning of the 1940s. The 1940s brought war to the United States, which resulted in many men's enrollment into the military. Women also joined the military service, which forced the women homemakers into the workforce.
Because of the advanced positions women were taking while the men left, they had an increased sense of self-confidence and power. This launched the movement for women's equal rights. Many women believed that since they were able to compete successfully in the workforce, they would easily be able to compete on the athletic fields.
World War II also brought the creation of the All-American Girls Baseball League, which was the first women's professional team. It was started in 1943 in an attempt to replace Major League Baseball, which had been canceled because of the war.
Once the war was over, organizations for women in sports began to evolve as sports became more competitive and intercollegiate and interscholastic competition spread.
The 1950s and 1960s brought a change in the social ranks of America. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 helped increase the status of women and minorities, giving birth to a wave of feminist activism. As a result of this, the United States heavily debated an equal rights amendment. This brought great attention to the rights of women involved in sports.
In 1957, women in college seeking greater athletic opportunities were thrilled when the official position statement of the Division for Girls and Women in Sports was amended to state that intercollegiate teams may exist.
In the late 1960s, the women's movement in sports was quickly moving toward a position more in line with men's athletics.
By 1972, a schedule of national championships for women's sports was announced that included gymnastics, track and field, swimming, badminton, volleyball, and basketball.
On June 23, 1972, the Title IX program was officially signed and passed.
It stated, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance."
On an international scale, this brought many opportunities to female athletes across the globe. The newly introduced Title IX program showed its positive effects right off the bat in Munich during the Summer Olympics of 1972.
These games marked the first time that women were able to participate in the Olympics with close to equal opportunities as men. While there were only 1,059 women athletes in comparison to 6,075 male athletes, this was a major advancement.
Women were able to compete under the same competitiveness and equally with men in archery, track and field, canoe slalom and sprint, diving, fencing, artistic gymnastics, swimming, and volleyball.
Still, men had 16 events offered to them that women were not allowed to participate in. There were no events offered to women that weren't offered to men.
Looking at the most recent Olympics held in London during the summer of 2012, 39 events were offered and both men and women had the option to participate in all 39 events.
This shows how far the Title IX program has gone and the rights it has given women around the world. Women and men are now equally represented in the Olympics.
As a result of Title IX, women and girls have benefited from more participation, opportunities, and more equal facilities and equipment.
Statistics show that women who were under 10 when Title IX passed have much higher sports participation rates than women who grew up before Title IX. The total number of girls playing high school sports increased from 300,000 in 1970 to over 3 million today.
55% of the post-Title IX generation participated in high school sports compared to the 36% of the pre-Title IX generation. Also, Title IX has assisted more women in receiving athletic scholarships and have given an opportunity to numerous athletes for higher education that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
In fact, many women Olympic athletes credit Title IX for giving them the chance to attend college through athletic scholarships and to participate in sports. Additionally, because of Title IX, the salaries of coaches for women's teams have increased.
In recent years, Title IX has been spreading to even more countries internationally, specifically in emerging economies and low-income countries because new laws are being passed relating to the people's rights. So Title IX becomes particularly relevant because it is a rights-based approach. Across the globe, changes are being made.
For example, in 1994, the Brighton Declaration was written during the First World Conference in the UK, which created an informal working group on women in sports and called for a sporting culture that values and enables the full involvement of women in every aspect of sports.
Declarations from conferences in Windhoek, Namibia, Montreal, Canada, and Kumamoto, Japan produced documents containing the same rights.
Additionally, in a 1995 World Conference on Women, the Beijing Platform for Action was adopted as an agenda for women's empowerment.
This action plan included policy recommendations to governments and addressing the issue of women in sports in Asia.
It states that the opportunity to participate in sports and physical activity must be available to girls and women of all ages, on the same basis as they are made available to men and boys.
The United Nations Commission on the Status of Women has also addressed the rising gender empowerment potential of sports and has worked alongside member states to ensure equitable access to sport for women and girls.
This specifically addressed sports and physical activity by working with many countries' governments. The United Nations system hopes to encourage women to practice regular sports and recreational activities.
By highlighting the significant gap between gender equity policies and their implementation, it helped to solve the need for effective mechanisms to ensure follow-through and accountability.
The International Olympic Committee plays a central leadership and policy-setting role in the world of sports. In 2004, the Olympic Charter was amended to include a specific reference to the need for change related to women's involvement in sports.
Certain regional intergovernmental bodies have also produced frameworks and focused on certain areas related to gender fairness within sports. They also have been working to promote gender equality and women's empowerment more broadly across the globe.
3 countries' programs have led the way in these government bodies. They include the Asian Women in Sport Action Plan, the African Sports Confederation of Disabled, and Group on Women in Sports.
Despite such widespread global recognition of the important potential of sports for women and girls, in combination with the role sports play in attaining the goals of gender equality, the United Nations has recently reported that there has been discrimination against women and girls in sports worldwide.
This issue shows how the demands for further action that still needs to be taken and fought for. Also, successful strategies and programs must be scaled up and expanded to ensure that women's rights continue to grow and are safely protected.
While significant progress has been made, there are still room for improvements. The main factor right now is time, and only time will tell how the rights and equalities of women everywhere will play out.
Along with athletic rights, women have been gaining rights and responsibilities in more areas such as the workplace, educational opportunities, in the military, and so many more. It has turned into an epidemic and is spreading across the globe at amazing rates.